Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm Kat Abner, Vice President of Community Impact at the Fund for the Arts. And I'm excited to talk with you all today about the Sustaining Impact Grants. So today, our time is just going to be spent going over the purpose of the funding, showing you all the materials that are available to you, and then answering any questions that you all might have. So we have some new applicants joining us. So I'm going to go over the purpose and some of the things that many of you may already be familiar with if you are a longtime grantee. So we'll dive in. So the Sustaining Impact Grants, the purpose of those is to provide mission-based operating support to Greater Louisville charitable arts organizations whose programming supports the priorities of Imagine Greater Louisville 2020 and now 2025, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then also to steward the dollars of the donors who contribute to the Fund for the Arts. So we utilize this process to assess the impact of the organizations who are applying and making sure that the funding that is awarded is going to the purpose of serving the community through the arts. So our timeline for Sustaining Impact Grants. The applications opened on April 16th, so you should all have received information about how to access your level application. We're doing 2 information sessions, both of which have been are being recorded. The first one happened on April 28th, and we're doing today's session as well. You'll have until June 18th to submit your application. And then once your application comes in, it goes through our review process. So the next thing that you'll be expected to do after you submit your application is attend a question and answer session with our grant review panel. So those will be August 4th through August 5th. And we'll send you information soon about when your allotted date and time slot is. Once we go through our review process, the Community Impact Committee of the Fund for the Arts will convene and make recommendations for awards to our board. And our board has final say on what the grant awards are. And you'll be notified by August 31st if you have been awarded funding and how much that funding would be. And then we'll also share with you the letter of agreement that we ask all of our grantees to sign. So as I mentioned, there are different funding levels with Sustaining Impact Grants, and your funding level is dependent upon your organization's operating revenues over a 3-year period. So we take the average of that number. If your organization has average operating revenues of $300,000 and below, you're level 1. If it's $300,001 to $1 million, you're level 2. And if it's above $1 million, you're level 3. If you have any questions about what funding level you are, how that number gets calculated, please reach out and let me know. We're happy to talk through any questions you may have. So the Sustaining Impact Grant has 4 sections essentially, and each of them have a specific weight towards the total score. And so what you'll see next is what each of those sections are, how much each of them are worth, and then what the connections are for each section to Imagine Greater Louisville 2020 and now 2025. So the reason I'm mentioning Imagine 2020 and Imagine 2025 is timing. So Imagine Greater Louisville 2020, as you all know, launched in 2017 and then sunsetted at the end of 2020. The community went through a second planning process, and we now have Imagine 2025. Because Imagine 2025 just came out, we're not expecting that your organizations have fully adopted strategies and actions that are included in that plan. So for this year's application for Sustaining Impact Grants, you can reference Imagine 2020 as well as Imagine 2025. It's whatever makes the most sense for your organization. So the first component of the application is what we call the extraordinary section. This is worth 10% of the overall score. And when we say extraordinary, we are really looking for you to tell us about how your organization provides exciting, unignorable, nationally and regionally recognized offerings that attract talent and attention to Greater Louisville. And the Imagine 2020-2025 connection is the promotion priority area. So we recommend that if, when you're creating your responses in the extraordinary section, that you reference the actions and strategies that are part of Imagine 2020 and 2025's promotion priority area. The second component is essential, and that is worth 30% of the overall score. And what we're looking for here is for you to tell us about how your organization is essential to Greater Louisville. What are those things that you provide that helps build a thriving community, that drives educational outcomes, that drives access to the arts, that drives economic activity? So the Imagine connections here are access, education, and cultivation. One thing that you'll see in the application, and when you dive into what level you are, the amount of information that you're asked to provide in the essential section is dependent on your level. So if you're level 1, you're asked to address one of those 3 areas. So you can pick access, education, or cultivation, and you have to tell us about how you further that for our community. You can talk about all 3 if you want. You can talk about 2, but you're required to talk about 1. If you're a level 2 organization, you're required to talk about 2. And if you're level 3, you're required to talk about all 3. The next component is equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this is worth 30% of your total score. For those of you who are returning applicants, you'll note that this weighting has changed. Last year, this was worth 20% of the application, and this year it's worth 30%. Obviously, the Imagine 2020-2025 connection area is equity, diversity, and inclusion. And what we're looking for here is for you to demonstrate how your organization is equitable and inclusive, how you're intentionally telling and serving, or telling the stories of and serving diverse and historically underrepresented and underserved populations. Another change this year is if you're a returning applicant, we're asking that you demonstrate progress that you've made from your last Sustaining Impact Grant submission, about training that you've completed for your staff and your board, as well as involvement in any community initiatives such as Build Back Better Together or Imagine Greater Louisville 2020 or 2025. If you're a new applicant, we're asking for you to provide details on your involvement in community initiatives, as well as any professional development or planned professional development for staff and board members in this area. The last component is organizational capacity and sustainability. And you'll also note, if you were an applicant last year, the weighting for this section has changed as well. Last year it was worth 40%, and this year it's worth 30%. So what we're looking for here is for organizations and applicants to demonstrate that they have strong plans for maintaining sustainable operations in FY 2022 and beyond, so that you can recover from COVID-19 and help rebuild a thriving, vibrant, and inclusive community for all. We're also interested in learning about any opportunities that you're exploring for new collaborations, shared services, strategic alliances that could result in new revenue or cost savings for your organization or the sector as a whole. And in this section, there is not an Imagine 2020-2025 direct connection. So what I'm going to do now is navigate away from the PowerPoint and take you to the Fund for the Arts website and go over all of the materials that are available to you on that page. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again. All right. So when you go to the Fund for the Arts website, you're going to use the same navigation path to find this information as you have for past applications you've submitted, or if this is your first sustaining impact grant application, the same path that you use to submit your letter of interest. So you'll hover over apply for funding. You'll go to for organizations, and then you'll click on sustaining impact grants FY 2022. So on the web page, what you'll find is just some summary information of the things that we just talked about, as well as the timeline. And then at the bottom of the page is where you're going to find all of your materials and resources. So I'll point out a couple of things. We highly recommend that you start with the grant guidelines before you start filling out your application. Read this document. It is a comprehensive overview of all things sustaining impact grants. It's going to talk you through the application process, how is your eligibility determined, what each of those components of the application are that we just talked about. It'll go into the timeline as well. And then it's also going to talk to you about how your application is going to be reviewed and who's involved in that process. And then I think one of the best tools that's available to you is the attachment A, which is the grant criteria and scoring rubric. So if you go to that section of the grant guidelines, you're going to find each question that's in the application under each component, an example of what would be included in exemplary response, and then what each point value is for each question. So we recommend you look at this while you are completing your application as a guide for the kinds of information that the reviewers are going to be looking for as they're assigning scores. And again, there is information for all of the components. The next thing I'll show you is the grant glossary. So you probably noticed in the grant guidelines document that there were some terms that were bolded in blue. And also in the application, which I'll show you, any term that's bolded in blue is defined in the grant glossary. There haven't been too many changes from last year to this year. We did add some information about some diversity language that might be useful to you all. But again, it's broken down into 3 sections. There are impact terms, there are financial terms, and then there are also application review terms. So I recommend keeping that up as you're working on the application for you to reference. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is the application itself. The application is essentially the same for level 1, level 2, and level 3, with that one exception of the essential section where you're going to be selecting how many of those areas you're going to be responding to. So I'm just going to open up the level 1 application and we'll just use that as a reference point. So if this is your first time filling out an application for the Fund for the Arts, you'll click New Applicant. And all you need to do is put in your email address and then create a password. And then you'll click Continue, and that will open up an application for you. If you've already submitted an application to the fund, just use your email and login information that you've already created. So I will do that. So what you'll notice when you log in is there's like a navigation bar at the top of the screen, and that will help you, it'll guide you through the whole process, but you can also jump between any of the tabs that you need to. The first tab is Introduction, and this is really just a summary of the grant guidelines. It provides some information, again, about what level you're in, and then information about our applicant information sessions and the deadline. And then what you'll see is at the bottom of every page, there's this questions bar. So if you have a question while you're working on the application, you can click the hyperlink and send us a direct email. So the first tab where you'll be asked to fill in information is organization info. And this is mostly kind of background information about your organization as well as contact information. So you'll be asked to share, the name of your organization, where you're located, your mission, and then select a primary artistic area. We do ask for website and social media information. You know, all of these platforms are listed, but you're not required to use them. So if your organization does use them to talk about your work, great, let us know, share the handle or the link to your platform or your page. If not, it's okay, you can just leave it blank. We ask for your executive director information. So we know that not every organization utilizes that title, but this is the person who's considered like the main lead for your organization. And then we also ask for an application primary contact. So the primary contact can be your executive director, but whoever it is that you enter here is the person who will receive contact or communication about this application. So rather than always emailing your executive director if we have a question, this is the first person we're going to reach out to with any questions we might have throughout the application process, as well as after your grant award is determined. So make sure you identify the appropriate person here. So the first tab where you're going to be asked to provide like narrative responses is extraordinary. And again, this summarizes, you know, what is in the grant guidelines. On each page, you're also going to have links to information about Imagine Greater Louisville 2025, as well as Imagine Greater Louisville 2020, so you can use those as needed. What you'll see is that there are, you know, at least three questions on each page. And just like last year, the questions are structured the same way in each section. So what you'll see is the first question on each of each section is about how your organization typically would look or be operating in a non-COVID environment. So you can frame your responses based off of what you looked like before COVID happened. The second question is really around how COVID impacted your organization and then how you have responded in the last 12 months. And then the last question is about your plans. So how are you planning to come out of COVID over the next 12 months? So you might notice that on some of the sections, there might be an additional request for an attachment. So under extraordinary, you are able to upload one document, so one like PDF that has up to 3 examples of how your organization is extraordinary. That could be something like attaching press clippings or providing links to videos or news segments. But we ask for one document that includes all the information. This isn't an optional attachment. You don't have to include it, but you do have, you know, the option to do so if you like. The next section is essential. So what you'll see here that's different from the other sections is there is the drop down asking you which of the Imagine priority areas you're going to be addressing. And again, if you're level 1, just pick 1. If you're level 2, you pick 2. If you're level 3, you pick all 3. And then you have 3 narrative questions again. The next section is equity, diversity, and inclusion. And again, 3-question format. We have added this year a new attachment. It is the equity, diversity, and inclusion matrix. So in order to access that, you'll go to click here to download template. And it might take you a second for it to download. If you have any issues downloading it from inside the application, it's also available on the web page. But it's essentially a spreadsheet where we're asking you to tell us about equity, diversity, and inclusion at your organization for your staff and your board and your participants. So we know that it has probably been challenging, especially for participant information, to track who is accessing your virtual content. So we ask that to the best of your ability, estimate the participants who have been engaged over the past year. So we asked for racial and ethnic background information, age information, gender identity, geographic residence, and then specific communities identification. So you'll notice that some of these terms are in blue, which means that they are defined in the glossary. So please feel free to utilize that as a reference. So once you've completed that, you'll save it to your computer, and then you'll click choose file and upload to add it to your application. All right. The next section is organizational capacity and sustainability. And there are a couple of changes to this section. What we've done is we've kept the 3-question format, but rather than having all of the questions be narrative questions, we've changed question 11 to just be the financial workbook. So in order to download the financial workbook, you can download it from inside the application, or it's also available on the web page. So I'm just going to open the template and walk you through this. All right. So it's the same financial workbook for all levels, but you'll be asked to provide different information depending on your level. So in order to complete the workbook, we've provided some suggested things that you're going to need to reference. So obviously you're going to need the template. You'll need your audit report for your last completed fiscal year if you're level 2 or level 3. Your 990 or 990 EZ from your last completed fiscal year if you're level 1. And financial statements used to prepare the 990 or 990 EZ if you're level 1. If you are level 2 or level 3, you do not need to provide financial statements. Oh, Jordan, let me know the template's not showing. Thank you, Jordan. Here we go. Is it there now? Okay, great. All right, so again, on the first page is the checklist. So you'll also need to have your projections for how you're going to close out FY21, your budget for FY 2022, and then a list of your finance committee members and or staff or board members who have financial expertise. So we know that you may have lots of scenarios for your FY 2022 budget, but what we ask for you to provide is the one that you think at the time that you submit the application that's the most up-to-date or most realistic for your organization. So we also offer some recommendations for which order to complete each of these tabs in, because the way that the workbook is set up is that it automatically feeds information across tabs. So we suggest you start with the financial reporting form, and then you go to the FFTA funding summary, then you complete the financial reporting form in totality, you do the reconciliation of operating revenue, then the variance analysis, and then the COVID-related programs, and then the finance committee members. So we'll just go straight across each of the tabs, and I'll show you how each of them look. So this is pretty much the exact same workbook as last year. We've obviously updated the fiscal years at the top. One thing we have added is line 25, which is for PPP loan forgiven or planned to be forgiven. So if you received PPP, we have a new place for you to add that this year. Under FFTA funding summary, this really hasn't changed from last year. Again, just enter in your information to the best of your ability. Under reconciliation of operating revenues, it's pretty much the same format as last year. There is a guide at the bottom to let you know where to look for some of this information. There's also the variance analysis, where we ask for you to tell us for any of the items that are identified in column A, if there is a variance of plus or minus 5%, to give an explanation of why that variance occurred. And so that variance will calculate automatically for you based off of what you entered into the other fields in the workbook. A new tab that we've added this year is COVID-related programs. And this will help the review committee understand other resources that have been infused in the sector to help respond to COVID-19. We also will use this information to talk to donors and local government about the impact of COVID-19 on the sector. So there's spaces here for you to provide information on the payroll protection program, the economic impact disaster loan, PPP round 2, and then Save Our Stages. We know that you may not know yet if you're receiving an award from Save Our Stages, and that's okay. Just let us know kind of like the status of that application. And then if you received any employee retention credits. The last tab is Finance Committee. And so this is where you'll just let us know, who first and last name is on your Finance Committee, what their occupation is, how many years of financial expertise they have, and then how many years they've been involved with your organization. We recognize that level 1 organizations may not have a Finance Committee, and that's okay. If you don't, please identify any board members or staff members who have that expertise and help your organization with your financial management and oversight. So going back to the checklist, a couple of things to keep in mind is enter data into blue cells only. If it's blue, that means you can type into it. If it's any other color, you shouldn't be able to make changes. If you find that there's a mistake in any of your historical information, or if there's some, difference in how you're reporting information than how we ask for it, contact Janie and she'll be able to help you with any navigation issues you might have with the template. Before you submit, Janie recommends that you kind of do this self-check. So look at your total unrestricted net assets, and does that agree with what was submitted last year? Look at your last fiscal year's total unrestricted net assets, and does that agree with your 990 or your audit, and so on and so on. And she gives you some identifiers of where you can self-check that information. So again, if you have any questions about the financial workbook, you can reach out to me, but Janie is going to be your expert on that. So we're going to go back to the application. All right. So you've got your financial workbook done. You also have the option to attach scenarios. So if your organization is looking at various scenarios for what your finances are going to look like over the next year, feel free to attach those. And then we also ask for you to attach some additional documentation in this section. So if you're level 1, you're asked to attach your 990 or 990 EZ for your most recently completed fiscal year. If you're level 2 or level 3, we ask for you to attach your audit. Everyone is asked to provide their FY 2022 budget. Again, if you're level 1, we'll ask for the financial statements used to create the 990 or 990 EZ. If you're level 2 or level 3, you do not need to provide financial statements. We have staff list and board list, and there are templates for both of those, which you can download. And that's the application. It is designed so that you don't have to complete it in one sitting. So at the bottom of every page, there is the save and finish later option. So when you do that, it's going to close you out of your application. And then the only way that you'll be able to access any of your saved work is to log into your grantee account. So I'll show you how to do that. So say you've saved your application and you don't need to work on it anymore and you've closed everything out. You'll just go back to fundforthearts.org, apply for funding for organizations, back to sustaining impact grants. And then at the bottom of the page, rather than clicking start your application, you'll go to access your in progress application. And if you've been logged out for a long time, it will probably ask you to sign in, and you'll just use the same login information that you use to create an application. But if you do it, relatively soon, it might still have you logged in. So you'll be able to see all of the applications that you have in progress, and then you can just go to the last one that you were working on, and it'll take you to the last spot where you were before you saved and closed the application. Once you've got everything filled in and you're ready to submit, go to review my application, and it's going to pop up in red with anything you may have missed. So I have not filled in any of the fields, so it's telling me that I have a lot of work left to do. So assuming I go back and fix all of that, what you'll be able to see once it's all done is if you scroll down, you'll see the application in its entirety, and then how you responded to all of the fields. So you can kind of go back and review your responses. Once you've done that and you're happy, you just scroll all the way to the bottom, and it will say submit. And so you'll click submit, and then you'll receive an email notification confirming that your application was submitted. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and see if you all have any questions about the application or any of the materials that we've covered so far. So we have a couple in the chat, it looks like. Oh, looks like I already addressed those. Okay.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
So one with the matrix, the diversity matrix, we don't currently ask anybody's gender or gender identity. What would you recommend? Should we just leave that blank, or should we try to send something out to our students and staff?
You can kind of go about it different ways. For your participants, if you aren't able to survey them, you could estimate based on what you know about them. And then I would write a little note kind of in your application, like maybe next to your estimations, like explaining like, this is an estimation, we came up with this number by doing X, Y, and Z. If you're able to, you could always send out an anonymous survey to your staff, to your board. And on the matrix, because it is anonymous, they may, feel like they can answer in any way they want, without feeling like they'll be able to be like identified easily. But there is an option for there to be like a prefer not to disclose. So that is there as well. If you want to send out a survey and you need help like creating what that looks like, we're happy to provide guidance on how to do that.
Okay, great, thank you. And then last question, is there a way to easily get like a editable version of this that we can work outside of the portal on, or is it just you have to copy and paste?
That's a good question. Yeah, you would have to copy and paste.
Okay.
We could probably put together a Word version that you could use for drafting purposes, if that's helpful.
Yeah, we've just been cutting and pasting each time, but I didn't know if I was missing like a button that had
yeah, that's one thing about this system. It's you can download the application as a PDF, but it's not like a PDF where you can, draft in. So
okay. That was it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, in the chat says in the application there is a reference to providing quantitative and qualitative data examples outcomes from our work over the past 12 months or based on a non-COVID year. What is your preference as we compile information? So we don't have a preference. We left it open because we know that staff capacities have been greatly reduced because of COVID-19, and that can really impact the type of evaluation that you can do, like the capacity that you have to do that. So I would say provide whatever you think is most reflective of your organization. And if you want to, you can include in your like narrative response, what that like the source of that information and the time frame of it. So so we leave that up to you. You're not going to be penalized in the scoring if you provide pre-COVID information versus current COVID information. Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions about the application or other materials to this point? Okay, not seeing any. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate back to the PowerPoint. And we'll just go over, I think, one more slide. Okay. So I wanted to give you all just a kind of a summary of how the review process works. So the first step in the process is the staff review. So once you submit your application, by June 18th, the staff will go in and read what you've submitted just to make sure that it's complete. We don't provide comments, we don't provide scores. We're not going to go in and suggest that you change your answer to, better fit a question or anything like that. We're just making sure that the information is all included that's required. Once we complete that review, we send your applications electronically to 2 different panels. There's the financial review panel, and that is made up of mostly local CPAs who have nonprofit CPA experience or have done like auditing of nonprofits. And they will score the organizational capacity and sustainability section and provide comments. And then it also goes to the grant review panel. And so the grant review panel is made up of some community impact committee members, which is a board committee of the Fund for the Arts. It's essentially our grants committee. And then there are also going to be at least 2 external panel members who are from outside of Kentucky and have had positions in like arts grant making or arts management. So they understand, what it is your organizations do and what the finances should look like. And then we also invite donors and additional board members, but those 2 groups don't score. So we'll have our grant review panel and our financial review panel scoring the applications, but then there may be other representatives in the panels that might ask questions, but they don't provide a score for your application. Once we get through those 2 review panels, the Community Impact Committee meets and reviews all of the scores and comments, and then they make funding recommendations to the Fund for the Arts board. And then the board approves the grant awards. And then once that's done, staff will send you communication about your scores, your reviewer comments, and then if you receive a grant award and how much that grant award is. So that is the review process in a nutshell.
Sorry.
There is additional information on that in the grant guidelines, but if you have other questions, please let us know. So I'm going to stop sharing and come back to you all to see if you have any final questions.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Everybody who submits an application at this point is invited to come to the panel discussion or the question, right?
That's correct. Yes. So every applicant will meet with the review panel, and you're assigned a 30-minute time slot. But really you're only going to be meeting with the panel for about 20 minutes. And so what that looks like is you do a 5-minute introduction to your organization, and then there will be 15 minutes for Q&A with the panel for them to ask clarifying questions about your application. And then as long as you score 50% or 50 points on your application, you're eligible for funding.
Mm-hmm. And then how many people do you recommend come to that? And I guess you want like a mix of board and staff members? Yeah,
we typically recommend no more than 5 because then everyone doesn't usually have a chance to speak. So yeah, we would recommend a mixture of staff and board. And whoever you do decide to bring, make sure that they know what's in the application, that they've read it beforehand.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Kat, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Trying to remember from last year for our supplemental information and examples of our work, is there a possibility of submitting video content? Would that be viewable by the panels?
Yes. So what we recommend that you do is you copy the link into the PDF.
Okay, great.
So we also, it's not required, but what we would recommend is that if you're going to do that, don't just include just a link, maybe provide like 50 to 100 words of like, this is what you can expect to see when you click on this link. I mean, the review panel is not expecting it to be like a virus or anything, but if they have some context about what to expect, it helps them kind of understand what they're looking at.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, the funds team is here to help. So you can reach me and Jordan at the grants@fundforthearts.org email address. You can also email us individually. And then you can also catch Janie at her email, which is jmartin@fundforthearts.org. And with that, we'll end today and hope you all have a great rest of the day.